News Channel 5 network, this is MorningLine with Nick Barris.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us on MorningLine. Nick Barris here with you on a Thursday. And I'll tell you what, I know many of you pay very close attention to some of the more high-profile legal cases going on in the Middle Tennessee area. And so what I've said we're going to do is periodically have our legal analysts join us to touch bases on some of the very latest developments, especially when you consider that a lot of these cases likely in this coming year will be covered gavel to gavel right here. But I know so many of you paying close attention. And there are some new developments, including some breaking this morning that we're going to want to talk about with News Channel 5 legal analyst Nick Leonardo. Good morning.
Good morning, Nick.
It's good to have you on. And the truth is, Nick, with you, we could have you on every darn week with some of the things that happen legally in this city.
Seems like we're seeing more and more of these just crazy fact scenarios.
Oh, yeah, and high-profile cases. Couple of things, and as we go along, we'll open up the phone lines for you to touch on. Just one that happened. I'm not even sure if you're aware of it yet this morning. The tragic case of Kyle Yortlitz, February of last year, local musician shot and killed during a robbery attempt at his home in North Nashville. 5 juveniles taken into custody. There was a transfer hearing where they wanted to have them moved to adult court. We learned this morning that 2 of them, including the accused shooter, the judge in juvenile court announced they will be transferred to adult court. The other 3, no decision reached, but may stay in juvie. What does that mean?
Well, that's a very significant decision, and I'm sure that's one of the hardest decisions.
It's rare, isn't it? She doesn't do this often.
It's one of the hardest decisions that Judge Calloway has to make is to determine, should we leave these children in juvenile to try to rehabilitate them, or have they reached a point, or is this such an egregious crime that they need to be tried like an adult? And the reality is now these 2 young men are going to be
one's a man, and one's a young, a 16-year-old boy, and the other's a 15-year-old girl.
So they're both going to be facing, first-degree murder charges and be, facing the adult penalties that go along with that. So it's very significant in the lives of both of those young people.
Because, again, as I said, 16 and 15, if convicted, I think they both then would face 51 years in prison.
Correct. If it's first-degree premeditated murder or felony murder, which it could have been felony murder, yes.
What's interesting, and you guys can weigh in on this, is I hear so often as more young people commit more and more serious crimes, people get frustrated that they feel they're not being held accountable, and a lot of them just want to throw away the key and throw them in jail and transfer them to adult court. But essentially, that decision made by Judge Calloway in the case of these 2, and I think most people would say if this shooter was merited, it's basically giving up on these kids, meaning that you're saying at age 16, this person's life is over. They, if convicted, and they will be, based on what we know about the evidence and what we know, that's 51 years. Stick a fork in them. They're done at age 15, 16. No rehab for you. You're done.
Well, they obviously could plead this case down in criminal court and adult court, and that may very well happen. They may end up 25 or 30 years, but nonetheless, those are big decisions that are made. And I think there's a big difference in kids who steal cars and mess with marijuana versus people who actually take firearms and shoot other people. That's a serious offense. And all judges have to balance, protecting the public with, trying to figure out, if this person can be rehabilitated. And so it's a very significant decision on her part. And the other 3, obviously, their roles may be a little bit different or lesser than the 2 that were transferred.
Remember, there were some reports that some of the hearings, we couldn't have cameras in juvenile court, but you could go in there and observe, and reports that the accused shooter, which was the 16-year-old male, at some point was just sitting up there laughing and kind of not taking it seriously and acting. And I don't know if that's because he had been in trouble so many times in the past and gotten away with it. Maybe somehow, some way he thought he'd get away with this. But I think as the judge sits there and sees those types of attitudes in court for a murder case, at that point you're like, see ya.
Well, you're seeing in our General Assembly right now on both sides of the aisle, you got the Republicans who are trying to change the law as it pertains to running or evading arrest from police officers, increasing the penalty. Then we saw yesterday Representative Hardaway out of Memphis. He has a new bill where he's trying to increase the penalty for drive-by shootings. And so I do think that the legislature is trying to take a response. But again, I think Ben Hall has a piece airing tonight about, are we doing what we're supposed to be doing correctly with juveniles in the state of Tennessee versus Kentucky? Kentucky, and that's a big debate on what's going on in that system.
Yeah, and how you address it, because you and I agree on this. I mean, everyone these days wants to be punitive, and if you kill someone in the way of the Yorlitz case, of course you should be punished. But on the other side of that coin, if he's convicted and goes to prison, you and I, and our taxpayer dollars, and the prisons, which continue to get crowded, are going to pay for him to be incarcerated for the next 51 years. My take is if there's any way to prevent this, obviously, and save a life, number one, but two, rehabilitate them, get to them early before they commit these serious crimes, because the last thing I want to do is keep locking people up. If for no other reason, for selfish reasons, I'm sick and tired of paying for all these inmates to be locked up. I don't like it. It's expensive. They get sick. They get all these benefits. They're locked up. It's better that you get them so they can fit back into society. And that's what Sheriff Hall talks about all the time.
Well, and I think we're taking a much different look at criminal justice today than maybe it was way it was looked at 20 years ago.
Yeah.
I mean, our jails, I think people are starting to agree that, folks that have a drug offense or, marijuana offenses and things like that, they don't need to be incarcerated necessarily. We need to save those spots for people who are, raping children or killing people or something of that nature.
Right.
The more serious offenses, we need to have space for that and maybe not incarcerate the lesser offenders, and that's when you're starting to see these alternatives to incarceration, like drug court, which we have here in Davidson County. Is a very successful program, and I anticipate through the Lee administration seeing the drug court program grow all over the state of Tennessee.
All right, we're going to get to some calls and such, but I wanted to hit you on one other. We knew that you and I were going to cover, and when it happens, we will, the Delkey trial gavel to gavel. All right, and that was scheduled to go,
next month.
Yeah, next month, and then it was postponed at the request of the prosecution until June. So now we're on tap to start in June. I wanted your take on this. It's interesting that the reason for it was not a delay request by the defense. This was by the prosecution, and they said that they needed time because they just received approval for the funding they needed to hire an expert to come in and testify on police protocol when it comes to shootings. And because they weren't able to bring him in prior because they didn't have the money, they have to do it now, and it's going to take him a couple months to go over the case file. It's just interesting to me. When I saw, are you telling me you didn't have an expert? And what's this about the money and the delay? That just seemed weird to me. And it makes me wonder, did they have trouble finding an expert to testify? And then how do they have to go about getting money approved to pay for him to come in? Well,
they would... I know if it was on the defense side, because I haven't worked in the prosecution's office, but you would go to the administrative office of the courts and ask for funds, for an expert. And I don't know if they apply through the AOC, or the state would, or if the state would apply through the Tennessee District Attorney General's conference. But obviously some of these experts are very expensive.
Okay.
And that may be in response to what they anticipate the defendant's proof being.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's not, and of course, defense attorneys never met a continuance that they didn't like.
David Rabin did not object.
No, you're not going to see him objecting to that sort of a continuance. But I would imagine that it will go, I think, January 15th or 16th.
No, June.
That's right.
Oh, it's going. You're right. I think jury selection will start, maybe, I'm trying to remember the date. The 11th, maybe? I don't know. Maybe that's, it's going to be in June. And by all accounts, I've heard, unless there's something very unusual happening, that's going for sure. And we'll be doing it gavel to gavel, of course. And we know the whole issue on that. I mean, do you think jury selection will take long? Because remember, the defense wanted to bring a jury in from outside. Judge Monty Watkins in higher courts denied that request. So everyone knows about this case. Most everyone in Nashville has seen a clip, and I think a lot of people who have seen a clip of the video of the shooting have made their minds up on whether it was a justified shoot or not.
Well, and that's where we are in America, and that's how we rush to judgment in this age of instant information. But I think it's important to note that it's not that you have to find someone that hasn't seen the video or that is unaware of the facts surrounding the video. You have to find someone who has not made up their mind. And I think it's important for all of the general public. We don't always see is this video, okay? And I think what's going to lead to a conviction or what's going to lead to a not guilty verdict is going to be the facts surrounding it.
Right.
What happened beforehand?
That's not on the video.
And that's not on the video. So I think it's very important to not rush to judgment. We know what the video shows. We all know what the video shows. But again, and it's a unique thing because we know that it's not a whodunit. Okay, it's like the Vanderbilt rape case that we did gavel to gavel. I mean, we know who's responsible for killing Mr. Hambrick. The question is, does that conduct rise to the level of a criminal offense? And if so, which criminal offense is that? And he's obviously charged with first-degree murder, and so we know that he meant to kill him. We saw him pause. We saw him him shoot. We know that that was the intent. And so it's an interesting kind of concept to determine, is there criminal liability for that conduct? And then there was a story that recently leaked through the media that he had, Officer Delkey had pulled a taser a couple of months.
WPLN did a story on this. It was interesting.
Yeah, he pulled a taser a couple of months earlier against a individual in the street who had a firearm, and he was reprimanded for that because the person had a firearm and he was supposed to pull his firearm.
But he resolved it safely. It worked out.
Right, but again, he gets reprimanded. I don't know if he got time off, but there's some note in his file to the effect that he didn't follow protocol by pulling his taser.
So this next time he pulls a gun, then fires a shot, and now he's in this pickle.
And so that's what I think you're going to see a lot of that from the defense's standpoint, is that, look, this is what he was trained to do. He followed it to a T. He got in trouble for taking a less restrictive means or a less lethal means to get out of the controversy. And so I think we're going to see that be a huge part of the defense, as well as some of the statutory things that allow a police officer to shoot a fleeing felon.
You put it to the policy then. That's interesting. Well, the jury selection, and I'll say this, we know that Delkey is Caucasian. We know the victim Hambrick was black. And I do believe that opinions among prospective jurors in large measure will be split among racial lines as well. There's a racial component here. I'm not saying there was a racial component in terms of the shooting and all of that, but how they view it. It's very different. I have friends that were white, I have friends who were black, and I've talked with many of them about their different take on this. And it seems like, based on your background, you view this video differently. And there are different backgrounds out there. That's why I'm predicting that there's a very good chance there's going to be a hung jury in this trial. Yeah. And this is real early for me to say that, but I'm just going that way. Because you know that jury is going to have to be multicultural too, though. Unanimous, sure. But I mean, it will be made up. There will not be an all-white jury. There will not be an all-black jury. There may be some Hispanics, some Asians on it, but it's going to be a diverse jury. There's no way on earth it can be all-white or all-black. That ain't happening.
No, and I think you're going to see a big fight about if the prosecution tries to strike or get rid of any African-American jurors. I think you're going to see a big bunch of arguing about those particular issues and exactly why they're striking them. You know, they're striking them because they happen to be the same, race as the decedent in this case, or the victim. Are they striking them for a cause or for a just reason because this person was a former police officer, or this, those kinds of things.
Yeah.
And so that's a very important jury selection process.
It's going to be a fascinating case when it comes about, and a very serious one. Listen, we'll take a break. When we come back, we've got phone calls coming in. You can talk to us a little bit about what we've touched on, the Delkey case, or the idea of transferring juveniles to adult court. When we also come back, Nick and I will touch bases on some other high-profile cases, including some new developments I have today that I'm going to have more tonight in the Joe Clyde Daniels case. We'll be back with more right after this.